We have a couple more names to add to our growing list of shadow bank casualties. And yes, collateral is once again the common theme. The first of them, no surprise, is in the subprime auto business, another canary in the credit coal mine. The other one has been accused of faking $500 million in invoices that are used as collateral. Yes, $500 million fake collateral. Now, individually, they don't mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. I keep saying that. Put them together, though, especially one after another, there's fire starting to rage down there in the shadows underneath all of this billowing smoke. I mean, that's another thing. The memo has even gone out to stop using the term shadow bank. Authorities don't want the public to get the idea that these things are in some way as shadowy as they really are. Instead, we're going to now say non-depository financial institution. And as stupid as all that might seem, it's yet another indication that the smoke really is getting pretty thick. I mean, as I pointed out yesterday, the deputy governor from the Bank of England outright stated she, quote, sees parallels with the GFC in terms of the shadowy nature and, to a lesser extent, the degree of exposure and potential losses that we're talking about here. So apparently we're no longer going to go with shadow, because there's one thing central banks don't want, and that's for anyone to have the correct impression of money, finance, and economy when they're not going in the right direction. But underneath the jargon and the unfamiliar nature of all the shadowy stuff, it's a story as old as economics, bubble behavior. Jay Powell said everything was fine, and who was going to argue against him? After all, the upside is always more fun. But now that the world can see more clearly that maybe he wasn't right about all these things, look what keeps popping up out of the shadows. Or, excuse me, look what keeps popping up out of the non-depository financial institutions. The latest casualty in the auto financing business is a factoring company called Primalend Capital Partners. This one provided funding for auto dealers who cater to lower income consumers, sort of like Tricolor. They extend loans to the dealers who then use the proceeds to either finance car loans to their customers and then post those loan receivables as collateral, or when dealers are buying inventory, Primalend would fund those purchases with the cars coming in standing as collateral for those loans. I mean, you can see where this is going. Lower income Americans are absolutely struggling, no matter what Jay Powell has said this entire time. They never caught up from the supply shock, remaining impoverished to this day. And now they have to sweat out the labor market shift into the flat beverage, seeing their hours disappear and their paychecks shrink. And even those who aren't being directly impacted by the weak economy, they're buttoning up, worried about maybe they're going to be the next one who gets his hours cut and maybe even sent to the unemployment line. We've been watching and telling you about auto loan delinquencies that have been rising for over a year now. It's starting to produce negative results even in the shadows as the first crack in what is a much wider phenomenon of private credit and shadow banking, again, the latter term that we're not supposed to use for all of these various obvious reasons. At least in the case of Primalend, there aren't any allegations of fraudulent collateral, at least not that I've seen and not yet that have come out anyway. But that doesn't mean that collateral isn't a problem. In fact, it almost certainly has been. This has already come up under a different name, though the same general business area. In late September, I told you when CarMax posted its terrible quarterly earnings that one of the key factors depressing its results was depreciation of inventory. What the company said was there were so few buyers, bad economy, a lot of demand had been pulled forward into earlier quarters by the tariff fear distortions, and as all of that was being paid back, the prices of used cars, therefore used car inventories, went down, and according to CarMax, by quite a lot. So think about that in the broader context of other used car dealers and using their used cars as collateral to secure their own financing. The value of the collateral they've been posting has gone down, which means it's going to be harder to raise the same amount of funding at the same terms. They'll have to contend with higher interest rates to compensate factor firms for lower valued collateral. And it's also an issue for the factor firms themselves. Remember how they make their money, basically pocketing a spread from being perceived as a safe borrower in money markets and then re-lending to riskier borrowers, like in this case, these subprime auto dealers, and in some cases directly to subprime auto borrowers. They are financing middlemen who are taking risks that regulated banks haven't been taking since August of 2007. This is why you see most of the big factor firms tied up in some way with regulated banks. They use the regulated bank backing to be able to borrow at the cheapest possible interest rate cost. But if their collateral they're taking in when relending is questionable, either from a valuation basis or the number of frauds that we keep seeing, factor firms are going to get further squeezed because their own cost of funding will go up as well, which will make it even more difficult to borrow and relend, making it even more difficult for struggling subprime borrowers to finance, and you end up with a growing credit crunch that spreads beyond just subprime autos. And we're also seeing reports that factoring firms are getting beat up on cash flows. Remember how it works on the invoice side. They get invoices that come in as collateral, and then they collect on those invoices to get paid back, and whatever's left over they give to the company that they lend money to. But what we're seeing is in certain industries, and this is spreading as well, customers are taking longer to pay on invoices because of course they are. Jay Powell was not right about the economy. Before we go on with our video today, let me ask you a question. What if your gold could actually pay you every single month in more gold? That's what today's video sponsor, Monetary Metals, lets you do. And here's how it works. You still own the gold, it's still in your name, it's fully insured, but instead of just sitting there doing nothing, it actually starts working for you. Monetary Metals has built a system that turns idle gold into productive gold, earning real yield, paid in physical gold, not dollars. No selling, no trading, no converting. You keep your gold, and every month you get more of it. It's a simple idea, but it solves a big problem. If gold is money, it should act like money, and now it finally can. If you're a long-term gold holder looking for a smarter way to store value, check them out at monetary-metals.com/Snyder. Again, that's monetary-metals.com/Snyder. I highly recommend booking a call with them today to see if they're the right fit for you. We thank Monetary Metals for their sponsorship, and now let's get back to the rest of our video. So when the factor firms lend to these companies who have these receivables, they give those companies the cash up front and then have the rights to collect on the invoices because the invoices are the collateral for this receivable factoring. And according to FreightWaves just yesterday, there is a growing trend in the freight business, one which is heavily reliant on this kind of short-term financing. There's a growing trend among customers on those invoices to slow down their payments, another negative factor that we don't really want to see. The weak freight market combined with other economic ills is resulting in factoring companies now finding themselves waiting longer to get paid by whoever hired the carrier in the first place, at least according to Brian Alsobrooks, who's president of factoring company Phoenix Capital. Quote, "We've seen a number of shippers that have just unilaterally decided to extend from net 30 days payment to net 45, to net 75, to net 90, and even some to net 120. So they're trying to play the cash flow game. We also have to price higher if we're going to take longer to be paid back. So it really erodes that carrier or broker margin that's already squeezed." And where is this all coming from? Going back to the article, also Brooks added, "It may be springing from legitimate issues of credit deterioration, of course it is. And they were doing it to try to prolong and use their cash to pay others, basically robbing Peter to pay Paul," which is something that you see in the late stages of lots of economic cycles. People get cash strapped, so what do? You take longer to pay your bills. That's true of not just consumers, it's also true in the business community. And that's a problem for the businesses, but it's also a credit problem in these circumstances where factor firms are trying their very best to stay afloat. And a lot of them it's getting to be too far. So it's not just subprime autos. There are these stretch conditions everywhere that are becoming more obvious as the situation, broadly speaking, deteriorates. It was getting difficult before, as Mr. Alsobrooks was describing, but now with the economy in further difficulty, plus credit providers, they're scrutinizing everything and almost certainly demanding to be compensated for higher risks, perceived as well as real. The margins for everything, including borrowers trying to make ends meet, and for the factor financing firms trying to ride the spread between low-cost borrowing on their end and decently managed risky relending, it just gets to be too much. So PrimaLend, going back to the story here, it had missed interest payments on its bonds over the past couple months, and that's why it's been put into bankruptcy. But another major factor that always goes along with this, pro-cyclicality as they call it, is just all the stupid stuff. We knew there was a lot of stupid stuff. There's always stupid stuff in these cycles. Lots of stupid stuff that took place. Lots of stupidness that was done so on Jay Powell Say So, and his cover it's now coming all back to the forefront, which means lots of perceived risks, and higher perceived risk means everything gets more difficult, more rigid, more inelastic, and more costly. And at the end of the day, it starts to become deflationary if it goes too far. As even Bloomberg reported yesterday in the wake of the PrimaLend bankruptcy, Donald Clark, who's the president of asset-based lending consultants, said lenders had become too complacent about who and what they are financing as their need to put money to work eclipsed concerns about risk. He advised the lender client against investing in First Brands back in 2022. He said, based on some of the same red flags investors have described since that company's bankruptcy, including a lack of detailed disclosure. Quote, you're going to lend hundreds of millions of dollars to a company and not open the hood to see how it looks inside? Is money that free, Clark asks? Until we get intellectually honest about the risks that we face and the need for more robust due diligence, we are vulnerable. But that's the thing. That's exactly what went on, and we all know it. We just weren't allowed to talk about it because Jay Powell, the mainstream insistence that there was only this great soaring boom of an economy. Lenders, whether factor firms or other kinds of shadow bank funds, they absolutely did lend without ever bothering once to open the hood and look inside. And we all know that was the case. They didn't waste their time and resources because Jay Powell basically told them they didn't need to. Everyone just rushed to get lending deals done as quickly and as efficiently as possible, just get the paperwork done and don't worry about checking everything. The agreement says there's collateral, great. No one will ever actually need the collateral, so just file it away and say we got it. It's all there in theory. Everyone wanted to believe Jay Powell. Not only did he give this fantasy an air of legitimacy, it fueled the rationalizations that they had to have taken place in order for everything to get this messed up. I mean, these factors firms knew that they were getting lower and lower quality borrowers coming in, but the Fed says don't worry about it. So nobody worried about it. I mean, the Fed, after all, Jay Powell, he must know what he's talking about, especially where it comes to the economy. So I'm not seeing it, but Powell does. So don't fight the Fed. No one wanted economic reality and common sense to get in the way and spoil the massive free money volumes. And that's how you get to not just cutting corners, but cutting massive corners and taking stupidity to stupid levels. And that brings us to the next one this week. Another one that's now in the telecom space. It also includes factoring and also fraudulent collateral. And this one has gotten absolutely zero attention, and so admittedly, there's very little information on it. But the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that maybe 500 million of invoices that were pledged as factor collateral were simply made up, fake, fraud, another one. See what I mean about people not looking under the hood? They absolutely didn't, because doing those things the right way and looking at the economy as it actually was stood in the way of the good times. The upside is always more fun. See what I mean about Jay Powell providing cover? These lenders could see that none of these things were lining up, but if the Fed's freaking chair says it's all good, who is anyone else to argue otherwise? Keep your head down, keep churning out the loans, and forget about checking the collateral. Don't fight the Fed. But what the Journal said was that a couple of firms in the telecommunications industry had filed bankruptcy back in August. A couple of names called Broadband Telecom and Bridgevoice, and these are names that you probably don't recognize, even though there's a very good chance that you've used their services and just never noticed. But this week they were forced to, quote, place their financing units into bankruptcy after lenders alleged it had fabricated accounts receivable that were used as loan collateral. And we've seen this too many times more recently. And the fake collateral was apparently the reason for the August filing, and now it has spilled over to these firms' own factor financing affiliate. According to Bloomberg Law a couple days ago, BB Capital SPV LLC, and see what I mean about shadow firms? This is kind of how they always look like. Which is an affiliate of an invoice financing company, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Monday, according to court documents. Factoring providers Cariox Telecap and Cariox TowerCap and telecommunications companies Bridgevoice and Broadband Telecom were listed as affiliates to the debtor. It's all this incestual relationship. And Cariox describes itself as a specialty invoice financing company providing direct working capital to cell tower infrastructure construction. All based on collateral that in this case, and First Brand's case, and maybe Tricolor's case, was not as solid as everyone Everyone just assumed that it was because it was so easy to assume that when Jay Powell says these pleasant things on TV and the mainstream media and everyone else who's credentialed and economists and everything of the sort, they all say the same thing. Everything is just fine. Don't worry about a thing. Ignore all those market signals over there. Powell has you covered until he doesn't, until he goes from solid labor market to not solid labor market in just a couple days. And that's the other angle to this private credit, the hidden and often tangled web of corporate connections. It's highly incestuous, which is another reason, or really a book of reasons, to actually do the due diligence on both sides. If you're a regulated bank lending to factor firms, by all means, don't just take everything at face value. Don't accept Jay Powell's version of the economy. The roaring private credit days are over. Check on the quality of the factor firms that you're lending money to. Check on the quality of the loans that they're making and the collateral that they are accepting, which is exactly what's going on right now. It's not enough just to have some signed papers. I mean, that much is coming through loud and clear in every single one of these names on what is this growing list. As Jamie Dimon said last week, there are cockroaches, and we're starting to see them now that some light is being shined into the shadows. And that's another thing, another way you know this is really starting to get serious. Mainstream media sources are no longer using terms like shadow bank or even private credit for what are blatantly obvious reasons. Saying shadow bank gives people the impression a lot of what the shadow bank does is hidden in deep, dark shadows, because it is absolutely hidden in deep, dark shadows. Up until last month, nobody cared. Say shadow bank. Shout it from the rooftops. It's another one of those hardly anyone noticed because Jay Powell's solid economy. But now with the sector a lot more under scrutiny for all the wrong reasons, starting with Powell, the term shadow bank has been quietly replaced with the much more comforting and benign sounding term non-depository financial institution, or the letters that you're going to see everywhere, NDFI. Just listen to how both of those sound and you see exactly what I mean. Shadow bank sounds risky, worrying even. Non-depository financial institution sounds solid. It sounds official, as is intended. It's just another small clue that shows how this thing is really going. As I discussed yesterday, even the Bank of England is now in on the NDFI private credit shadow banking nexus. The central bank over there is going to conduct an examination of exposures. Here's what I said yesterday. Governor Andrew Bailey even told stunned parliamentarians in the House of Lords he was already getting the runaround from private credit shadow bank leaders. Same as we saw here last week after JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon called out private credit cockroaches, which elicited the vehement denials that there couldn't possibly be anything buggy about shadow credit portfolios. But according to Bloomberg, Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey told a Parliament committee on Tuesday that, quote, alarm bells were ringing in the sector. He cited conversations with industry figures who assured him that everything was fine in their world, apart from the role of rating agencies, in an echo of the confusion over the quality of debt and subprime debt securitizations almost 2 decades ago. Bailey said, well, we're not playing that movie again, are we? If you were involved before the financial crisis and during it, alarm bells started going off at that point. And so give Bailey some credit for not just accepting the smoke that's clearly being blown up his arse. What this means is that even the central bankers, who up to now have been largely silent, apart from issuing reports here or there with some carefully worded cautions, that they're now taking it seriously and even to the point of taking action, or planning to take action, or announcing that they plan to take action. Going back to Bloomberg here, Bailey and his deputy, Sarah Breeden, confirmed a Bloomberg News report earlier last Friday that the central bank was speaking with firms about conducting a system-wide exploratory scenario to find vulnerabilities in the private credit market. This so-called stress test would use a similar model to last year's review of risks to core UK financial markets. We can see parallels with the GFC, said Breeden. What we don't know is how macro significant those issues are. There are parallels to the GFC in the respect that, first of all, a lot of stupid stuff took place under really bad assumptions, bad economics that was given to them by the people who are the worst at economics, which is the economists at central banks. But you have that combined with a whole bunch of shadowy information asymmetry, and it risks having a backlash, creating a backlash where lenders and relenders say, I'm not really sure what I've got here, so just pull back. So what all this means is twofold, really threefold if we want to extend it into broader finance. First, the stress is largely coming from the economy that is weaker than everyone had assumed, or more realistically, had been rationalizing away thanks mostly to Mr. Powell, his worthless econometric models, and the real power of the Fed, which is not what everybody thinks. It is the appearance of being competent and powerful, one that is reinforced relentlessly by the media, by academia, and so on. By all means, fight the Fed in the market because the market does this all the time, but don't you dare fight the Fed's narrative, at least until the evidence turns decisively against it, which is kind of where we are the last couple months. And that's the real damage from the negative payrolls and job shedding. They can't support the narrative any longer. So pressure is building in credit from a bad economy. Even the mainstream data shows is in rough shape and getting rougher. And that means what we're now seeing more clearly in factoring and shadow banking, non-depository financial firms, it's a reflection of and confirmation of the weakening economy. Second, and just as important, the feedback in credit will help further weaken the economy even more. Money gets tighter among credit providers and the redistributors, the middlemen factoring and doing other private credit stuff, and that actually tightens the financial system in a way the Fed only wishes its rate hikes could at least a couple years ago. Then the third matter is interest rates themselves. They go down when money gets tight. Now, not for high-risk borrowers and troubled factoring firms. Notice that's not the case. Their rates, which you never see, they go up as money gets tight. Instead, money flows from them to safety and liquidity, which means the worse this gets, the more there is going to be demand for treasuries and other forms of safety like gold. And eventually, as the Fed can't fight its own narrative any longer, even short-term policy rates follow the market and they go down too. So this broadening credit story is a huge reason why interest rates are going to go down by a lot, and then stay there a long time. Shadow bank stupidity and all of these rationalizations are two key ingredients in central bank Pringles. At this point, it is probably worth revisiting the story from last week and comparing all the similarities, Zions and Western Alliance, and that's the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers, and until next time, take care.